The sun hung mercilessly over Painted Rock, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Yates Sutherland adjusted his worn leather gloves. At 25, he'd already seen more of life's cruelties than most men twice his age. The endless horizon of the western frontier had been both his salvation and his prison these past 7 years, ever since he'd fled east with nothing but a horse, a revolver, and a heart hardened by betrayal. Yates pulled his cream-colored Stetson lower over his clear blue eyes, shielding them from both the sun and unwanted attention as he dismounted in front of the general store. Standing just over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, he cut an impressive figure despite his youth. His face, though handsome with its strong jawline and straight nose, rarely softened with a smile. The light stubble on his cheeks couldn't hide the small scar near his mouth, a reminder that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The West doesn't care about a man's feelings, his first trail boss had told him years ago. Out here it's just you and survival. Yates had taken those words to heart. Survival meant keeping to himself, taking jobs driving cattle from ranch to ranch, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Relationships were liabilities when each day might bring rustlers, hostile natives, or trigger-happy desperados. What Yates wanted was simple: enough money to buy a small ranch in a quiet corner of the territory, far from people and their complications. What he needed, though he would never admit it even to himself in the dark of night, was someone to share the silence with, someone to make the empty miles and endless stars feel less like loneliness and more like freedom. Painted Rock wasn't much of a town, just a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence along the stagecoach route. Yates had stopped only because his horse needed rest and his supplies had run low. His plan was simple: restock, maybe have a quiet drink, and be on the trail again by morning. Those plans changed when the traveling medicine show rolled into town that afternoon. Wagons painted in garish colors parked at the edge of town, and a crowd quickly gathered as a man in a top hat began shouting about miracle elixirs and entertainment. Yates would have ignored the spectacle entirely if not for the water barrel by his horse running dry. Irritated, he led his chestnut gelding toward the crowd, hoping to find the town pump. That's when he saw the sign. Madame Lorenza, fortunes revealed, futures foretold. Yates scoffed under his breath. Fortune tellers were among the worst charlatans, preying on the desperate and lonely with vague predictions and false hope. He was neither desperate nor lonely, he told himself, just practical. The fortune teller's tent stood slightly apart from the main show, a modest affair of faded purple canvas. As Yates passed, an elderly woman emerged, her wrinkled face beaming. She knew about my herald coming home on the stage tomorrow, the woman told her companion, clutching a handkerchief to her chest. Yates rolled his eyes and continued toward the water trough he'd spotted behind the tent. "You do not believe in such things, young man," the voice came from behind him, accented and rich like molasses. Yates turned to find a woman standing in the tent doorway. She wasn't what he expected, no gaudy costume or painted face. Instead, she wore a simple dark dress, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes, though, were unsettling, so dark they appeared almost black and fixed on him with unnerving intensity. "No offense, ma'am, but I make my own fortune," Yates replied, tipping his hat politely but firmly. "Perhaps," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach those dark eyes. "Or perhaps fortune is already made, waiting only to be discovered." She gestured toward the tent opening. "No charge for the skeptic, consider it a professional challenge." Later, Yates would wonder what madness had possessed him to accept. Perhaps it was the heat, or simple curiosity, or the strange certainty in the woman's voice. Whatever the reason, he found himself ducking into the cool darkness of the tent, the sounds of the medicine show fading behind him. Inside, a small table covered with a black cloth held a deck of cards and a crystal ball that caught the light filtering through the canvas. The fortune teller, Madame Lorenza, he presumed, gestured for him to sit. "Your hand, please," she said, extending her own weathered palm. Reluctantly, Yates removed his glove and placed his hand in hers. Her touch was cool and dry as she traced the lines on his palm with a fingertip. "You carry much weight for one so young," she murmured. "The past hangs heavy, but it is the future that concerns us now." She released his hand and reached for the cards, shuffling them with practiced ease before laying 3 face down on the table. She turned over the first card. "The Hermit," she announced. "You have walked alone by choice, not necessity. You believe solitude keeps you safe." Yates kept his face impassive, though something uncomfortable stirred in his chest. She turned the second card. "The Tower, what you have built will fall, change comes ready or not." The third card made her pause. "The Lovers," she said finally, her voice softer. "Interesting. The cowboy who believes love has no place on the frontier will find it is the only thing that truly belongs there." Yates shifted uncomfortably. Generic predictions, he told himself. She could say this to anyone. When you meet a woman with eyes the color of prairie lilacs on a rainy day, who carries sunshine in her smile despite knowing shadow, she is your destiny. Before the leaves fall, you will face a choice: love or loneliness, life or mere existence. Madame Lorenza gathered her cards and sat back, studying him. "The fortune is told. What you make of it is your choice, of course." Yates stood, eager to escape the stifling tent, and the unsettling sensation that this stranger had somehow peered into his soul. "Appreciate the entertainment," he said stiffly, dropping a coin on the table. The fortune teller made no move to take it. "Not payment," she said, pushing it back toward him. "A talisman, keep it. You will know when to use it." Outside, the bright sunlight seemed harsh after the dim tent. Yates tucked the coin into his vest pocket without thinking, eager to finish his business in town and be on his way. Fortune tellers and destiny were nonsense, distractions for those who couldn't face the reality of frontier life. Yet as he led his horse to the general store, he couldn't quite shake the woman's words from his mind. 3 days later, Yates had put 20 miles between himself and Painted Rock when a late summer storm caught him on the open range. Thunder rolled across the darkening sky as he urged his horse toward a stand of cottonwoods near a creek bed, hoping for some shelter until the worst passed. As he approached, he spotted smoke rising from behind the trees, a campfire. Warily, he slowed his pace, one hand moving to rest on his revolver. Lone travelers in this territory were often targets for bandits or worse. What he found instead was a broken-down wagon, its rear axle cracked beyond repair. A canvas tarp had been strung between trees as a makeshift shelter, and beneath it, a young woman was attempting to keep a small fire alive despite the first heavy drops of rain. "Hello, the camp," Yates called, stopping at a respectful distance. The woman startled, rising quickly and reaching for a rifle propped against a nearby trunk. "I mean no harm," he added, raising one hand to show peaceful intent while keeping the other visible but near his weapon. "Just looking for shelter from this storm." She hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly. "Not much shelter to share, as you can see," she replied, her voice carrying clearly despite the rising wind. As Yates drew closer, leading his nervous horse, he got his first good look at her. She appeared to be around 20 years old, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket of faded blue. Her face, framed by loose strands of honey-blonde hair that had escaped a once neat bun, was smudged with dirt but still strikingly beautiful, high cheekbones, full lips, and a determined chin. But it was her eyes that made him pull his horse to an abrupt halt. They were an unusual shade of blue-violet, exactly the color of the prairie lilacs that bloomed after spring rains. "Are you all right, mister?" she asked, frowning at his sudden stillness. Yates cleared his throat. "Fine, just, the storm's coming fast." He nodded toward her broken wagon. "Looks like you've had some trouble." "That's putting it kindly," she sighed, lowering her rifle completely as she apparently decided he wasn't a threat. "Axle snapped yesterday. I've been waiting for my brother to return with help, but with this storm," she glanced worriedly at the darkening sky. "Your brother left you alone out here." Yates couldn't keep the disapproval from his voice. A flash of annoyance crossed her face. "I insisted. Someone needed to stay with our belongings, and I'm perfectly capable of defending myself. Lucas rode for Silverdale. It's only 10 miles east." Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain began to fall in earnest. Without further discussion, Yates dismounted and led his horse under the shelter of the cottonwoods. "I'm Yates Sutherland," he offered, securing his horse before helping her reinforce the sagging tarp. "Lily Patterson," she replied, working alongside him with practiced efficiency. "Headed to meet our uncle in Tucson. He's got a hardware store there." As the rain poured down around their small shelter, Yates found himself studying Lily when she wasn't looking. There was something about her that didn't fit his expectations. Despite her obvious predicament, she showed no signs of fear or helplessness. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, making the best of their situation by sharing her meager coffee and asking practical questions about the trail ahead. "Been traveling long?" he asked as they huddled near the small fire, the storm showing no signs of abating. "Almost a month," she replied, wrapping her hands around a tin cup of coffee. "From Missouri. Our parents passed in the influenza last winter, so Lucas and I decided to take Uncle Edward up on his offer to help with the store." A shadow passed over her face. "It hasn't been an easy journey." Something in her tone made Yates look closer. "Trouble on the trail?" Lily hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "We started with a wagon train, but there was an incident. A man joined our party in Santa Fe. He seemed respectable enough, a banker he claimed, heading to California." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "He took an interest in me that became unwelcome. When I refused his advances, he became threatening. Lucas intervened and there was a fight." "This man, he hurt your brother?" Yates asked, a strange protective anger rising in him. "No," Lily said, her lilac eyes hardening. "My brother was winning the fight when the man pulled a hidden derringer. I hit him with a skillet before he could shoot Lucas." She glanced up at Yates as if gauging his reaction. "He lived, but the wagon master asked us to leave the train. Said he didn't want trouble, and the banker had powerful friends ahead." Yates felt a surge of outrage on her behalf. That wasn't right. Lily shrugged, though the set of her shoulders betrayed her tension. "We've managed, and now I've shared my troubles with a complete stranger." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your turn, Mr. Sutherland. What brings you to this particular stretch of nowhere during a thunderstorm?" For reasons Yates couldn't explain, he found himself telling her more than he'd intended. Not everything, never that, but more than he'd shared with anyone in years. About driving cattle across 4 territories, about saving for his own spread someday, about the freedom and loneliness of the trail. As the storm raged on, their conversation continued, punctuated by comfortable silences. Lily spoke of books she loved and places she hoped to see. Yates found himself smiling more than he had in months, drawn to her practical intelligence and unexpected humor. When she laughed at something he said, a real laugh that transformed her face and made her lilac eyes sparkle, Yates felt something shift inside him, like ground giving way beneath his feet. Madame Lorenz's words echoed in his mind. "The cowboy who believes love has no place on the frontier will find it is the only thing that truly belongs there." He pushed the thought away. One pleasant conversation with a stranded traveler didn't change anything. Tomorrow her brother would return with help, and Yates would continue on his solitary way. That was how life worked best for him. But as the night deepened and Lily finally drifted to sleep, wrapped in her blanket across the fire from him, Yates found himself watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, and wondering what it might be like to have someone to talk with every evening, someone whose smile made the vast emptiness of the frontier feel like home. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and mud-slicked ground. Yates woke at first light to find Lily already up, attempting to salvage what she could from their ruined campfire. "Your brother should be back soon," he said, kneeling to help her. Lily nodded, though worry creased her brow. "If the creek hasn't risen too high for crossing." Yates glanced at the nearby watercourse, which had indeed swollen with the night's rain. A decision formed in his mind before he fully realized it. "I'll ride to Silverdale," he offered, "see if I can find him or bring back help." Surprise flickered across Lily's face. "You don't have to do that. You must have your own business to attend to." "Nothing that can't wait a day," Yates replied, surprised to find he meant it. His plan to reach Canyon Springs by week's end suddenly seemed less important than ensuring Lily's safety. Before she could protest further, they heard the splash of horses crossing the creek. A moment later, Lily Patterson rode into view, accompanied by a wagon driven by a burly man Yates didn't recognize. Lily proved to be a younger version of his sister, same honey-blonde hair, though his eyes were a straightforward blue rather than Lily's distinctive lilac. He eyed Yates with undisguised suspicion until Lily explained how he'd shared his shelter during the storm. "Appreciate you looking after my sister," Lily said finally, extending his hand. "I got caught on the wrong side of the creek when the storm hit, had to wait till morning to cross." As the brothers worked to transfer their belongings to the new wagon, Yates found himself reluctant to leave. He made a show of checking his horse's shoes, refilling his canteen, anything to delay the inevitable moment of departure. "Where are you headed next?" Lily asked, approaching him as he adjusted his saddle. "Canyon Springs," he replied. "Got a job starting next week at the Double Circle Ranch." "That's less than 30 miles from Tucson," she said, a smile brightening her face. "Perhaps we'll cross paths again." Something warm unfurled in Yates' chest at the thought. "Perhaps," he agreed, more pleased than he wanted to admit. An awkward silence fell between them. Yates cleared his throat. "Well, I should be on my way. Glad your brother made it back safely." Lily nodded, but as he mounted his horse, she stepped forward suddenly. "Mr. Sutherland Yates, thank you. Not just for the shelter, but for treating me like a person worth talking to. That's rarer than it should be out here." Before he could respond, she reached up and pressed something into his hand, a small book with a worn leather cover. "Something for the trail," she said. "You mentioned you liked stories." Yates looked down at the book, a collection of poetry by Tennyson, then back at her. "I can't take this." "You're not taking it, I'm lending it," Lily corrected with a smile. "Just another reason for our paths to cross again." As Yates rode away, he found himself already planning how soon he could reasonably travel to Tucson after his job at the Double Circle. The fortune teller's prediction echoed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't destiny. It was simply the unexpected pleasure of meeting someone worth knowing in a territory where such connections were rare. Still, he couldn't deny that something had changed. For the first time in years, the endless horizon ahead seemed full of possibility rather than emptiness. The Double Circle Ranch sprawled across 50,000 acres of prime grazing land north of Canyon Springs. Yates arrived to find the operation larger than he'd expected. A main house of substantial size, bunkhouses for at least 30 men, and corrals filled with prime stock. The owner, Harold Edmonds, was a former Army officer who'd built his cattle empire through discipline and shrewd business sense. "Sutherland, is it?" Edmonds said, looking over Yates with an appraising eye as they stood in the ranch yard. "Jackson says you've got experience with difficult drives." "Yes, sir," Yates confirmed. "Worked the Chisholm Trail twice and led a drive through Apache territory last spring." Edmonds nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. We're moving 3,000 head to the railhead at Maricopa Junction in 2 weeks. I need men who can handle trouble. Pay is $40 for the month, plus $10 bonus if we lose fewer than 50 head. It was good money, and the timing would put Yates near Tucson by early October. "I'll take it," he said. Life at the Double Circle quickly settled into a familiar routine. Yates worked from dawn to dusk, breaking horses, mending fences, and preparing for the upcoming drive. The other hands were a rough but decent lot, and Yates kept to himself as usual, though he found himself being more sociable than was his custom. In the evenings, while the other men played cards or shared body stories, Yates retreated to his bunk with Lily's book. He'd never been much for poetry, but he found himself drawn to Tennyson's words about knights and honor, about yearning and belonging. Sometimes he would read a passage and wonder what Lily would think of it, imagining her lilac eyes lighting up as they discussed the meaning. 2 weeks into his stay, as the cattle drive preparations neared completion, Yates rode into Canyon Springs for supplies. The small town was livelier than usual, with a territorial election approaching and campaign posters plastered on every available surface. At the general store, as Yates waited for his order to be filled, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Heard there was trouble over in Tucson," one man said to another as they lounged near the pot-bellied stove. "Some fancy Eastern banker causing a stir at Patterson's hardware." "What kind of stir?" the other asked. "Claims the new fella there, Patterson, assaulted him back in Santa Fe. Brought marshals to arrest him." Yates stepped closer, trying to appear casual. "When was this?" The men looked up, surprised by his interest. "Yesterday, from what I hear," the first man answered. "My cousin drives the Tucson stage. Said this banker, Hargrove or something, had a whole passel of lawyers with him." "And they arrested this Patterson?" Yates pressed. "Nah, not yet, but they're watching the store. Banker's staying at the Grand Hotel, throwing his weight around. Says the sister's a liar who led him on, then cried wolf when her brother caught them together." Yates' hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Appreciate the news," he said, collecting his supplies and heading for the door. Outside, he leaned against his horse, mind racing. The man Lily had described, the one who'd threatened her and tried to shoot her brother, had followed them to Tucson. Now he was spinning lies and using his influence to exact revenge. Yates should stay out of it. The cattle drive was starting in just 3 days, and Edmonds wasn't a man who tolerated workers who abandoned their responsibilities. Besides, the Pattersons were hardly more than strangers to him. Yet as he mounted his horse, Yates knew he had already made his decision. The hermit card from Madame Lorenz's reading flashed in his mind, the solitary figure holding a lantern, illuminating the path ahead. For years, Yates had chosen solitude, believing it kept him safe. Now, for the first time since he'd fled east as a young man, he was choosing connection instead, whatever the cost. He rode straight to Edmund's office, a small room attached to the main house. The rancher listened in silence as Yates explained he needed to leave immediately for Tucson. "A woman you met once for one night is in trouble, and you're willing to forfeit a month's wages and your reputation as a reliable hand," Edmonds asked incredulously when Yates finished. "Yes, sir," Yates replied, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. To his surprise, Edmonds didn't immediately refuse. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying Yates thoughtfully. "I had a cousin once," the rancher said finally. "Beautiful girl, full of life. A man she rejected spread vicious lies about her in our hometown. No one stood up for her." His expression darkened. "She took her own life that winter." Edmonds stood, moving to a map on the wall. "The drive doesn't leave for 3 days. If you can be back by then, your job will be waiting. If not," he shrugged. "Life's too short for regrets. Sutherland, go." Yates rode hard, stopping only when necessary to rest his horse. The journey to Tucson normally took 3 days. He made it in just under 2, arriving as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of the territorial capital. Tucson in 1878 was a city of contradictions. Adobe buildings alongside wooden structures in the American style, Mexican vaqueros mixing with soldiers from nearby Fort Lowell, and the first hints of Eastern refinement appearing in the form of a hotel with actual glass windows and a restaurant that served food on china plates. Yates headed straight for the business district, where he quickly located Patterson's hardware. The store was closed despite the early hour, its windows dark. A man lounged across the street, watching the entrance with unconcealed interest, one of the banker's hired men, Yates guessed. At the livery stable where he boarded his exhausted horse, Yates extracted information from the talkative owner. According to local gossip, the banker, one Gerald Hargrove of the First Bank of Denver, had arrived 4 days earlier with an impressive entourage. He'd immediately filed charges against Lucas Patterson for assault and had begun spreading rumors about Lily's character. The town was divided, with many taking the wealthy banker's side simply because of his obvious influence. "The Pattersons are staying with their uncle, old Edward Patterson, out on the east edge of town," the liveryman said, jerking his thumb in that direction. "Nice folks from what little I've seen. Shame about all this trouble." As dusk fell, Yates made his way to the address he'd been given, a modest house set back from the road with a small garden out front. He approached cautiously, aware of the possibility that Hargrove might have men watching this location too. Before he could knock, the door opened, and Yates found himself staring down the barrel of a shotgun held by a gray-haired man with Lily's determined chin. "State your business," the man, presumably Edward Patterson, said flatly. "I'm looking for Lily Patterson," Yates replied, keeping his hands visible. "My name's Yates Sutherland. We met when her wagon broke down about a month back." The shotgun lowered slightly, the cowboy who shared his shelter during the storm. "Lily mentioned you." Edward's suspicious gaze didn't waver. "Why are you here?" "I heard about the trouble with Hargrove. I want to help." Edward hesitated, then lowered the shotgun completely. "Come in." "Quickly." The interior of the house was modest but comfortable, lit by oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the simple furnishings. In the small parlor, Lily sat beside a young man lying on a makeshift bed, Lucas, though Yates barely recognized him. The young man's face was badly bruised, one eye swollen shut. Lily looked up at Yates' entrance, her lilac eyes widening in surprise. "Yates, what are you doing here?" Despite the circumstances, Yates felt a rush of pleasure at seeing her again. She looked different in the lamplight, her honey-blonde hair neatly arranged, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the extraordinary color of her eyes. But there were shadows beneath those eyes that hadn't been there before, and tension in the set of her shoulders. "Heard you had trouble," he said simply. "Thought you might need a friend." "Hargrove's men caught Lucas outside the store 2 days ago," Edward explained grimly. "Beat him half to death as a warning. The marshal says without witnesses, there's nothing he can do." "And Hargrove's spinning his lies all over town," Lily added, her voice tight with suppressed fury. "Claiming I led him on, that Lucas attacked him without provocation when he caught us together. Some people are actually believing him. He's threatened to have Lucas arrested as soon as he's well enough to be moved," Edward continued. "Says he has witnesses who'll swear Lucas tried to kill him in Santa Fe, and he's implied things about Lily that no decent person would repeat." Yates felt a cold rage building inside him, but he kept his voice steady. "What's your plan?" The three Pattersons exchanged glances. "We were thinking of leaving," Lily admitted. "Selling the store and heading further west." "Running," Yates said, not as a question. Lucas struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. "You don't understand what we're up against. Hargrove has money, influence, hired guns." "We're just innocent," Yates interrupted, "and running makes you look guilty." "We don't have many options," Edward said wearily. "The territorial judge isn't due for another month. By then Hargrove will have turned the whole town against us, and if they arrest Lucas—" "There's another way," Yates said, an idea forming. "But it's risky, and I'll need your help." As night deepened, they developed their plan. Edward would visit the newspaper editor first thing in the morning with evidence of Hargrove's real background. Documentation Lucas had obtained in Santa Fe after the incident, but before they left the wagon train. Meanwhile, Yates would confront Hargrove directly at the Grand Hotel, where the banker took breakfast each morning on the public terrace. "The key is witnesses," Yates explained, "respectable ones. Hargrove needs to show his true nature in front of people who matter in this town." "And how do you plan to make him do that?" Lily asked skeptically. Yates gave her a grim smile. "By being the kind of man he can't resist trying to destroy." Later, as Edward showed Yates to a small room where he could spend the night, the older man paused in the doorway. "You've ridden a long way for people you barely know," he observed. "Why?" Yates considered the question. He could have given a simple answer about justice or doing what's right. Instead, he found himself looking past Edward to where Lily sat tending her brother in the parlor. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he said finally. Edward followed his gaze, and a knowing look crossed his weathered face. "Be careful, young man, not just with Hargrove, but with her. Lily's had more than her share of disappointments. I won't see her heart broken again." Before Yates could respond, Edward left, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone, Yates removed his vest and felt something hard in the pocket, the coin the fortune teller had given him. A talisman, she'd called it. You will know when to use it. He studied it in the lamplight. It wasn't ordinary currency but an old Spanish piece, worn smooth around the edges. Tomorrow he would need every advantage he could get. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Yates dressed with unusual care in his cleanest shirt and the one good vest he carried in his saddlebags. He strapped on his revolver openly, legal in Tucson, though frowned upon in the more respectable establishments. Lily met him at the foot of the stairs, her face pale but determined. "Uncle Edward has gone to the newspaper. Are you sure about this?" "No," Yates admitted with a wry smile. "But it's the best chance we've got." She reached out suddenly, touching his arm. "Why are you doing this for us, Yates? The truth." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then into her lilac eyes. "Because when I rode away from your camp that morning, something changed. For 7 years I've been running from connections, convinced the frontier was no place for anything beyond survival." He took a deep breath. "Then I met someone with eyes like prairie lilacs who made me wonder if I've been wrong all along." Lily's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Lucas called from the parlor and the moment was broken. "Be careful," she whispered, stepping back. "Always am," Yates replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. What he was about to do was anything but careful. The Grand Hotel occupied the finest building in Tucson, a 2-story brick structure with actual glass windows and a terrace where the wealthy and influential gathered each morning. Yates arrived just as breakfast service was beginning, the tables filling with merchants, lawyers, and visiting dignitaries. Gerald Hargrove was easy to spot, a corpulent man in an expensive Eastern suit, holding court at the largest table. 3 men flanked him, tough-looking fellows trying to appear respectable in clean shirts that strained across muscled shoulders. Hired guns playing at being gentlemen. Yates strode directly to Hargrove's table and stopped, thumbs hooked in his belt. The conversation at the table died abruptly. "Mr. Hargrove?" Yates asked, though he already knew the answer. The banker looked up with annoyance. "Yes, what is it?" "My name's Yates Sutherland. I understand you've been spreading some tales about friends of mine, the Pattersons." A murmur went through the terrace as nearby diners turned to watch. Hargrove's face flushed red, but he quickly composed himself. "I don't know what you've heard, Cowboy, but I suggest you move along. This is a respectable establishment." "That's why I came here," Yates replied calmly. "Thought these respectable folks might be interested in the truth." One of Hargrove's men half rose, but the banker waved him back down. "The truth," he said with a forced laugh. "The truth is that young hooligan attacked me without provocation, and his sister is a woman of questionable virtue." Yates' hand itched to reach for his revolver, but he kept his stance relaxed. "That's not how they tell it, and not how the wagon master told it either in his sworn statement." That got Hargrove's attention. "What statement?" "The one he gave before witnesses in Santa Fe, detailing how you attempted to force yourself on Miss Patterson, and then pulled a hidden derringer on her brother when he intervened. The one the territorial newspaper is printing as we speak, along with testimony from 3 other families who traveled with your previous wagon trains and had similar experiences with their daughters." It was a calculated bluff. Edward was indeed at the newspaper, but they had no idea if the editor would print the story. Still, the effect on Hargrove was immediate. His face went from red to white and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "You're lying," he hissed. "Am I?" Yates reached into his pocket and pulled out Madame Lorenz's coin, letting it catch the morning light. "This came from your pocket in Santa Fe after Miss Patterson rendered you unconscious with a skillet. An unusual Spanish piece, easy to identify. You dropped it during the struggle." It was pure invention, but Hargrove's eyes fixed on the coin with horrified recognition. Yates realized with a jolt that the banker must indeed have owned a similar piece, perhaps a lucky charm or keepsake. "That's mine," Hargrove said, reaching for it. "Where did you get that?" Yates stepped back, pocketing the coin. "As I said, from your unconscious body in Santa Fe. Quite a struggle, from what I heard. You tore Miss Patterson's dress before she managed to defend herself." The terrace had gone completely silent. all pretense of not listening abandoned as Tucson's elite leaned forward to catch every word. "These are outrageous lies," Hargrove sputtered, but doubt had crept into the faces of those around him. "I am a respected banker." "You're a predator who uses your position to intimidate young women," Yates corrected, his voice carrying across the terrace. "And now you've come to Tucson to destroy the Pattersons because Lily Patterson had the courage to fight back, and her brother had the decency to defend her." "Get him out of here," Hargrove snapped at his men, all pretense of civility gone. The three rose, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Yates tensed, ready for the confrontation he'd known was coming. What he hadn't counted on was the intervention of a distinguished-looking man at a nearby table. "I believe we should hear Mr. Sutherland out," the man said, rising. Yates recognized him from descriptions as Judge Wilson, the most influential man in the county, especially since Mr. Hargrove seems more interested in silencing him than refuting these serious allegations. Hargrove's face contorted with rage. "This doesn't concern you, Wilson." "When accusations of this nature are made in my town, it very much concerns me," the judge replied coolly. "Particularly when they involve a young woman's reputation and a brutal beating that my court has yet to address." Something snapped in Hargrove. With a roar of fury, he lunged forward, shoving past his men to grab at Yates. "You filthy liar, I'll kill you." Yates sidestepped easily, letting the banker's momentum carry him stumbling forward. As Hargrove recovered and reached inside his jacket, presumably for a weapon, Yates delivered a single, precise blow to the man's jaw. Hargrove crumpled to the terrace floor. One of his hired guns drew his revolver, but found himself facing not only Yates, but also two deputies who had been summoned by a quick-thinking hotel manager when the confrontation began. "I believe we have some matters to discuss at my office," Judge Wilson said into the tense silence. "Deputies, please escort Mr. Hargrove and his associates. Mr. Sutherland, I'd appreciate it if you would join us." As they left the terrace, Yates caught snippets of conversation from the stunned onlookers. "Always thought there was something off about that banker. Poor Patterson girl to be maligned like that. Hargrove completely lost control. Did you see his face?" The plan had worked better than he'd dared hope. By provoking Hargrove into showing his true nature before the town's elite, Yates had shifted public opinion in a single stroke. Whether Edward succeeded with the newspaper or not, Hargrove's influence in Tucson was finished. At the judge's office, the full story emerged. Hargrove's men, facing serious charges themselves, quickly abandoned their employer. One revealed that the banker had a history of similar behavior in Denver and had fled west after accusations became too numerous to suppress. By afternoon, Hargrove was in a cell, awaiting transfer to the territorial prison for assault and attempted murder, not just of the Pattersons, but of two other women who came forward once news of his arrest spread. When Yates finally returned to the Patterson home, he found Lily waiting anxiously on the porch. "Is it over?" she asked as he approached. "It's over," he confirmed, climbing the steps to join her. "Hargrove's in jail, and Judge Wilson has dismissed all charges against Lucas. Your family's name is cleared." Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by something else, anger. "That was incredibly dangerous what you did. Hargrove could have killed you." "But he didn't," Yates pointed out with a small smile. "That's not the point," Lily exclaimed, stepping closer. "You risked everything for us, your safety, your job at the ranch," she faltered. "Why would you do that?" The question hung between them in the golden afternoon light. Yates knew this was a crossing point, a moment when his answer would determine which path his life would take. For years, he'd chosen solitude over connection, convinced that the frontier demanded it. But standing before this woman with lilac eyes and a spirit stronger than any he'd encountered, Yates suddenly saw with perfect clarity what Madame Lorenza had meant. The tower card, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. The lovers, not just romance, but a fundamental choice about how to live. "Because a fortune teller once told me I'd meet a woman with eyes the color of prairie lilacs who would change everything," he said softly. "And for the first time since I came west, I'm thinking maybe the frontier isn't just about survival. Maybe it's about finding someone worth surviving for." Lily's eyes widened. "A fortune teller." "In painted rock," Yates admitted, feeling foolish but pressing on. "She said I'd have to choose between love and loneliness before the leaves fell." He gestured to the cottonwood behind them, its leaves just beginning to turn golden. "And what have you chosen?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Yates closed the distance between them. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a declaration. But when Lily's hands came up to rest on his chest, when she responded with a softness that made his heart thunder in his ears, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, Yates kept his hands at her waist, unwilling to break the connection entirely. "I've chosen a different path," he said, "if you'll walk it with me." "The path of a wandering cowboy?" she asked, but there was no challenge in her tone, only curiosity. "No," Yates replied, "I'm done wandering. The double circles offered me a position as foreman after the drive. It comes with a small house on the property. Not much, but it would be a start." Lily's eyes searched his. "A start for what?" "A life, a future," he took a deep breath. "A family someday if that's what you want." "We've known each other so briefly," she reminded him, though she made no move to step away. "Time moves differently out here," Yates said. "A day can feel like a lifetime, and a month can reveal more about a person than years back east. I know what I feel, Lily. I've spent 7 years avoiding it, running from it. I don't want to run anymore." For a long moment Lily was silent, and Yates felt a flicker of doubt. Had he misread everything? Was he making a fool of himself? Then she smiled, that sunshine smile that had haunted his thoughts for weeks, and raised a hand to touch his cheek. "I told Lucas after you rode away that I'd never met anyone like you," she said softly. "Someone who listened instead of just waiting for their turn to speak. Someone who saw me, not just a woman alone on the frontier." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "I thought I'd never see you again, and now here you are, fighting my battles, offering me a future." "Is that a yes?" Yates asked, hardly daring to hope. Lily laughed, a sound of pure joy that made his heart swell. "Yes, Yates Sutherland. Yes to walking that path with you, wherever it leads." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, only the certainty of two people who had found in each other something rare and precious on the harsh frontier, a home for their wandering hearts. 2 weeks later, as golden leaves swirled around the small church in Canyon Springs, Yates Sutherland waited at the altar in a new suit, watching as Lily Patterson walked toward him on her uncle's arm. Her honey-blonde hair was crowned with wildflowers, and her simple white dress caught the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows. But it was her eyes, those extraordinary lilac eyes, that held his gaze, filled with the same wonder and joy he felt in his own heart. Behind Lily came Lucas, still moving carefully but healing well, proudly escorting Yates' surprise wedding guest, Madame Lorenza herself, whom he tracked down and invited as a gesture of gratitude. The fortune-teller had accepted with a knowing smile that suggested she'd expected the invitation all along. As Yates took Lily's hands in his, as they spoke their vows before friends both old and new, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in the span of a few short months. The man who had believed the frontier, allowed no room for love now, understood that love was the very thing that made the vast, dangerous territory bearable, even beautiful. Later, at the small celebration held at the Double Circle Ranch, Madame Lorenza approached the newlywed couple. She pressed something into Yates' hand, the Spanish coin he had returned to her after Hargrove's arrest. "Keep it now," she said with a smile. "A reminder that destiny sometimes wears strange disguises but finds us nonetheless." As the fortune-teller moved away to accept a piece of wedding cake, Lily looked questioningly at Yates. "Do you really believe it was destiny?" she asked. "That her prediction made all this happen?" Yates considered the question, turning the coin over in his fingers before slipping it into his pocket. "I think the words themselves didn't matter as much as how they opened my eyes to possibilities I'd been denying." He pulled Lily closer, breathing in the faint scent of wildflowers in her hair. The fortune gave me courage to see what was already in my heart. Lily rested her head against his chest, her hand over his heart. Then I'm grateful for her words, even if they were just a fortunate coincidence. Across the room, Madame Lorenza caught Yates' eye and raised her glass in a silent toast. There was something in her dark gaze, a certainty, a knowledge beyond the ordinary, that made him wonder if anything in life was truly coincidence. But as Lily lifted her face for another kiss, as their friends cheered and the future stretched before them bright with promise, Yates decided it didn't matter. Whether by fate or choice or some mysterious combination of both, he had found what he hadn't even known he was searching for, not just love, but a true partner for the frontier journey. And that, he knew with absolute certainty, was fortune enough for any man.